Do you believe in setting boundaries, even if it means losing people?
I remember waking up on the morning of my 30th birthday feeling a quiet anticipation mixed with the kind of exhaustion that comes from pulling double shifts at the hospital, where the beeps of monitors and the scent of antiseptic had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. Yet as I reached for my phone in the dim light of my small apartment in Columbus, Ohio, expecting at least a simple message from Mom or Dad wishing me well, or perhaps even Lauren with one of her overly enthusiastic voice notes filled with exclamation points, what greeted me instead was a barrage of notifications from our family group chat that transformed the day into something far more bitter and revealing, showcasing vibrant photographs of my younger sister Lauren standing triumphantly in front of the Eiffel Tower during her luxurious trip to Paris, her face radiant under the golden afternoon sun with a croissant in one hand and a shopping bag from some high-end boutique dangling from the other, while the accompanying captions from relatives and friends overflowed with praise about how she had earned every moment of this escape after her demanding job at the marketing agency in Chicago. And then there it was, Mom's comment slicing through the digital celebration like an unintended but sharply pointed remark, stating simply and without reservation that Lauren truly deserved this because she remained the pride of the family. A declaration followed by a cascade of agreeing emojis that amplified the sting, making it impossible for me to ignore how on this milestone day, meant to mark my own passage into a new decade, they had collectively chosen to focus entirely on her adventures abroad rather than acknowledging the daughter who had spent years quietly supporting everyone from the sidelines. Sitting there in my worn-out scrubs that still carried the faint traces of the previous night's emergency room chaos, I felt a wave of isolation wash over me as I continued scrolling through the posts, each image and update painting a picture of unbridled joy and familial support directed solely at Lauren, who had always been the one to capture the spotlight effortlessly since we were children growing up in that modest suburban home in Dayton, where her artistic talents and outgoing personality drew endless compliments from teachers and neighbors, while my steadfast reliability as the straight-A student and future nurse earned me little more than a pat on the back and expectations to keep contributing without complaint, a dynamic that had persisted into adulthood as I funneled portions of my nursing salary into the family savings account Dad had established after losing his steady factory job during the recession, an account he described as a collective safety net for emergencies or shared dreams like finally taking that long-promised vacation to the Grand Canyon, though in reality it seemed to serve primarily as a resource for Lauren's pursuits, funding her study abroad program in college or the down payment on her sleek city apartment, all while I managed my own modest life without ever demanding recognition for the overtime hours and skipped personal outings that made those contributions possible. The anger began to build within me gradually, not as a sudden explosion, but as a steady pressure akin to the tension that accumulates before a storm front moves in over the Midwest plains, prompting me to reflect on the countless instances where my efforts had been taken for granted, such as the time I covered Mom's medical bills after her knee surgery without a word of thanks beyond a vague promise to pay it back someday, or how Lauren's graduation party had been a grand affair with catered food and out-of-town guests while my own nursing certification milestone passed with a quiet dinner at a local diner that I mostly paid for myself. And as the online festivities continued to unfold with videos of Lauren laughing at a quaint Parisian cafe or posing dramatically on a Seine river cruise, I couldn't suppress a dry, humorless chuckle at the sheer irony of it all, realizing that if this was how they chose to celebrate on my birthday, perhaps it was time to redefine what deserving truly meant in our fractured family equation. Taking a deep, deliberate breath to steady the tremor in my hands, much like the composure I summoned during high-stakes procedures in the operating room where one wrong move could change everything, I opened the banking application on my phone, the interface loading with its familiar green glow against the backdrop of my cluttered kitchen counter scattered with unopened mail and a half-empty mug of cooling coffee, and as the account balance materialized showing a substantial $25,000 accumulated through years of my consistent deposits alongside whatever sporadic inputs came from Dad's part-time gigs, I felt a surge of resolve intertwined with a flicker of guilt, knowing full well that this money represented not just financial security, but the tangible evidence of my unspoken sacrifices, the kind that had kept the household afloat during lean times when Lauren's ambitions took precedence over practical concerns. With my thumb poised over the withdrawal option, I visualized the potential fallout, the confusion that would ripple through their plans, the way Mom's proud narratives about family unity might falter when confronted with the empty ledger, and Dad's quiet disappointment giving way to questions about loyalty. Yet the sense of empowerment outweighed the hesitation, compelling me to initiate the full transfer to my personal account, watching the progress bar fill inexorably as the funds shifted away from the shared pot that had benefited everyone but me for so long, a decision that brought an unexpected thrill racing through my veins, almost like the adrenaline rush after successfully stabilizing a critical patient, though this victory carried the weight of personal reckoning rather than professional triumph. Just as the confirmation notification chimed softly, sealing the act with digital finality, my phone began vibrating insistently with an incoming call from Mom, her contact photo, a faded snapshot from last Thanksgiving where Lauren stood front and center, filling the screen, and in that suspended moment, I pondered whether answering would unravel my secret immediately or allow me to navigate the conversation with feigned normalcy, leaving me teetering on the edge of revelation as the ringtone persisted, echoing the uncertainty that now defined not just this birthday, but the uncertain path unfolding before me. That incoming call from Mom forced me to compose myself quickly amid the lingering buzz of the withdrawal confirmation still fresh on my screen, her voice bursting through the speaker with the usual blend of warmth and distraction as she launched into a detailed recap of Lauren's latest escapades in Paris, describing the Eiffel Tower lights at night and the mouth-watering pastries from a corner bakery that Lauren had raved about in her most recent video update, all while casually inquiring if I had managed to catch any of the posts during my busy shift, expecting me to chime in with the obligatory enthusiasm that had become my role in these family exchanges over the years. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, gripping the phone a little tighter than necessary, and mustered a response that sounded convincingly upbeat, assuring her that I was thrilled for Lauren and promising to like the photos as soon as I had a free moment, even though inside the irony twisted like a knot in my stomach because here I was, fresh from appending the very financial foundation they relied on, yet playing along as if nothing had shifted in the balance of our unspoken family ledger. As the conversation wound down with her reminding me to take care of myself amid the hospital demands, a sentiment that felt hollow given how often my self-care had taken a backseat to their needs, I ended the call and immediately turned my attention to securing the transferred funds, navigating through the banking app to set up alerts and transfer portions into a high-yield savings account under a slightly altered name variation that I hoped would keep it off their radar for a while. The process methodical and calming in its secrecy, much like charting a patient's recovery plan step by step to avoid complications down the line. With the money now tucked away like a hidden ace in a game of poker where I'd finally decided to raise the stakes, I settled into the worn couch in my living room, the faint hum of traffic from the street below providing a backdrop as I pulled up my laptop to delve deeper into the history of that family account, pulling up archive statements and email threads that Dad had shared sporadically over the years, each document revealing a pattern of deposits from my post-tax paychecks funneled in religiously every month alongside smaller contributions from his odd jobs, only to see those funds dispersed in chunks that aligned suspiciously with Lauren's milestones, such as the $5,000 wire for her semester abroad in London during college or the $3,000 boost toward her first car after graduation. Expenses that Mom had justified in group chats as investments in the family's future star while glossing over my parallel sacrifices like postponing my own graduate studies to cover household utilities during Dad's unemployment stretches. A wry smile crept across my face as I scrolled through the digital trail, the absurdity hitting me full force. Because it was almost comical how they'd framed me as the dependable workhorse plodding along in the background, content with scraps of approval, while Lauren gallivanted through life with the reins firmly in her hands, Her social media feed a constant stream of curated successes that masked the reality of how much of that shine came from the collective pot I'd helped fill without ever dipping in for myself, and in that moment of clarity, I felt a spark of mischievous determination ignite, prompting me to craft an anonymous email from a generic address I'd set up through a free service, attaching a blurred screenshot of the depleted balance along with a cryptic message suggesting it was time for the family to reassess who truly carried the load and who reaped the rewards, the words chosen carefully to sting without revealing my hand. Like a well-placed jab in a boxing match that leaves the opponent reeling but unsure of the source. Hitting send brought a rush of satisfaction mingled with a twinge of apprehension, imagining Mom's furrowed brow as she opened it at her kitchen table or Dad's puzzled expression during his evening news routine. The message designed to sow just enough doubt to make them question their priorities without escalating to outright panic, a clever nudge toward the reckoning that had been brewing in my chest for far too long, and as I closed the laptop, the weight of the day's events settled over me like a heavy blanket, prompting reflections on what to do next with the windfall, perhaps finally enrolling in that advanced nursing program I'd eyed for years, or treating myself to a weekend getaway that didn't involve family obligations. Yet those plans felt tentative against the backdrop of the growing uncertainty about how long my secret could hold before the cracks widened into full fissures. The following days passed in a tense rhythm of work shifts and evasive responses to the group chat notifications that kept arriving with more glimpses into Lauren's Parisian idyll, videos of her sipping wine at outdoor bistros or exploring hidden bookstores that only heightened the contrast to my routine existence, until one afternoon during a rare lunch break at the hospital cafeteria, my phone lit up with a series of urgent texts from Lauren herself, her tone uncharacteristically clipped as she announced that a massive storm had grounded flights across Europe, forcing her to cut the trip short and book an emergency return to Chicago, with plans to swing by the family home in Dayton on her way, and woven into her message was a subtle undercurrent of frustration that made me pause, wondering if the anonymous email had already reached their inboxes and planted seeds of suspicion, or if some other unraveling had prompted her hasty departure, leaving me to stare at the screen with my heart pounding as the implications of her imminent arrival loomed like an uninvited guest at a party I'd only just begun to enjoy. Lauren's abrupt decision to truncate her Parisian adventure and head back home earlier than planned transformed the usual quiet rhythm of our family home in Dayton into a whirlwind of preparations and barely contained excitement, with Mom bustling about the kitchen early that Saturday morning to prepare a welcome-back spread that included fresh-baked bread from the local market and a pot of her signature vegetable soup simmering on the stove, its aroma wafting through the house and mingling with the faint scent of Dad's aftershave as he adjusted the living room cushions for optimal comfort, all while I arrived from Columbus with a bottle of inexpensive wine as my contribution, positioning myself strategically near the window to observe the driveway where her rental car would soon pull in, my mind already racing through scenarios of how this unexpected homecoming might expose the fragile threads I'd begun to pull at in our family's tapestry of favoritism and overlooked contributions. As the afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting patterns on the worn hardwood floors that had witnessed countless family gatherings over the years, Lauren finally appeared, dragging her oversized suitcase up the porch steps with a dramatic flourish that immediately drew Mom into a tight embrace and Dad into a hearty back pat, her tales of the storm-ravaged skies over the Atlantic spilling out in animated bursts about delayed connections at Charles de Gaulle Airport and the chaos of rebooking flights amid throngs of frustrated travelers, conveniently omitting any deeper frustrations that might have prompted her early exit, such as the mounting credit card statements or the anonymous email that I suspected had landed in their inboxes like an unwelcome postcard from reality. Settling into the familiar routine of catching up around the coffee table cluttered with photo albums and half-eaten snacks, I listened with a practiced neutrality as Lauren regaled us with embellished stories of her European exploits, describing midnight walks along the Champs-Élysées, where street performers captivated crowds, and gourmet dinners at hidden bistros that left her feeling like a character from a classic romance novel. each anecdote laced with just enough glamour to elicit oohs and ahs from Mom and nods of approval from Dad, yet I couldn't help noticing the subtle cracks in her narrative, like the way her eyes darted when she glossed over the financial details of her splurges, or how she quickly changed the subject when Dad mentioned dipping into the savings for a family extension of her trip. A comment that hung in the air awkwardly until Mom steered the conversation toward lighter topics such as neighborhood updates and my own unremarkable hospital anecdotes, which she summarized dismissively as keeping the world turning, before pivoting back to Lauren's adventures. The evening meal unfolded with a sense of forced harmony, plates of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes passed around the dining table under the glow of the overhead fixture that had been a fixture since our teenage years. But beneath the surface pleasantries, tension simmered as Dad casually brought up the family account during a lull, joking about using it to fund a group outing now that everyone was together, only for his expression to cloud slightly when Mom exchanged a knowing glance with him. A moment that revealed the anonymous message's impact more clearly than any direct accusation could have, prompting me to interject with a lighthearted quip about how Paris prices must have skyrocketed since my last budget research, drawing a strained laugh from the group that masked the underlying unease while allowing me to subtly undermine Lauren's flawless portrayal by suggesting that even dream trips came with hidden costs that tested one's resourcefulness. As the night deepened and conversations meandered into reminiscences of childhood vacations that always seemed to favor Lauren's whims over my practical suggestions, a sudden twist disrupted the fragile equilibrium when Dad clutched at his chest midway through a story about his old factory days, his face paling as he excused himself to the couch. Mom rushing to his side with a glass of water and me instinctively slipping into nurse mode to check his vitals, the episode revealing itself as a mild anxiety flare-up exacerbated by the day's stresses rather than a full-blown heart issue. Yet it served as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities we'd all overlooked in our individual pursuits, with Lauren hovering awkwardly on the periphery offering platitudes that rang hollow against the backdrop of her recent indulgences. Seizing the opportunity during the quiet aftermath as Dad rested and Mom fussed over him in the den, I exacted my next layer of revenge through understated sabotage by casually pulling out my phone to share a found article on common travel mishaps in Europe, the piece detailing how overspending on luxury experiences often led to unexpected account drains that caught families off guard, positioning the screen just visibly enough for Dad to glimpse it from his recliner during his recovery. The implication landing like a gentle but pointed elbow to the ribs without requiring me to utter a single accusatory word. A witty maneuver that planted further seeds of doubt regarding the sustainability of their prideful investments in Lauren's lifestyle. Retiring to the guest room later that evening with the house settling into an uneasy silence broken only by the distant tick of the hallway clock, I replayed the day's events in my mind. The mix of empathy for Dad's scare and satisfaction from the subtle disruptions, creating a complex swirl of emotions that left me questioning the boundaries of my emerging campaign, wondering if these clever jabs would ultimately heal the old wounds or merely reopen them in new ways, until a soft creak outside my door drew my attention, revealing Mom standing there in her nightgown with her phone clutched tightly in one hand, her face etched with concern as she whispered about receiving an alert from the bank showing irregularities in the savings balance that didn't align with their expectations, her eyes locking onto mine in the dim light as if seeking confirmation or denial, the weight of that unspoken query hanging between us like a veil about to tear, propelling the conflict into uncharted territory where secrets could no longer hide in the shadows. Mom's whispered revelation about the bank alert lingered in the shadowed hallway like an unfinished sentence that demanded completion, her eyes searching mine for some sign of reassurance or complicity as she clutched the phone displaying the ominous notification. The screen's faint glow illuminating the worry lines etched deeper into her face from years of juggling household finances and familial expectations, yet I held my ground with a calm deflection, suggesting it might be a simple glitch or delayed processing from the recent transactions, my voice steady despite the internal whirlwind of calculations about how close she had come to unmasking my calculated withdrawal on that fateful birthday morning. Retreating to the guest room with her reluctant nod of acceptance, I lay awake for hours listening to the house creak under the weight of unspoken tensions. The events of the day replaying in my mind like a looped surveillance tape that captured every subtle shift in dynamics, from Dad's health scare that humanized his quiet endurance to Lauren's polished stories beginning to fray at the edges under gentle probing, prompting me to recognize the need for an outside perspective to navigate the escalating risks of my revenge without losing sight of the moral tightrope I walked between justified retribution and potential isolation. The following afternoon, after a tense breakfast where conversations skirted the financial elephant with talk of weather and work instead, I slipped away from the house under the pretense of running errands, driving the familiar route to the outskirts of Dayton where my cousin Sarah lived in a cozy bungalow surrounded by community gardens that she tended with the same meticulous care she applied to family lore. Pulling into her driveway with a mix of relief and apprehension as I knocked on the door, knowing her sharp intuition had always cut through our relatives' facades during holiday gatherings where she observed more than she spoke. Over steaming mugs of herbal tea at her sunlit kitchen table cluttered with sketchbooks and half-read novels, I confided portions of the unfolding saga, describing the birthday oversight that ignited my actions and the anonymous email that had stirred the pot without boiling over. Watching her expression shift from surprise to empathetic understanding as she pieced together the long-standing pattern of favoritism that had marginalized not just me but others in the extended family, admitting she had noticed how Mom's pride in Lauren often came at the expense of acknowledging the steady contributions from the rest of us. Like the time Sarah had loaned money for Dad's car repairs only to hear it reframed as Lauren's influence securing better opportunities. Our discussion evolved into a tentative alliance, Sarah offering insights from her own vantage as a school counselor who dealt daily with imbalances in recognition and reward, suggesting that my withdrawal represented a necessary boundary setting rather than outright theft, though she cautioned about the emotional toll of prolonged secrecy, her words resonating as we brainstormed ways to expose the inequities without descending into outright confrontation. A collaboration that felt empowering yet laced with the dilemma of what to do with the funds now secured in my account. Whether to invest them in my long-delayed dream of specializing in pediatric nursing through an advanced certification program, or to hold them as leverage in the family negotiations ahead, the choice weighing heavily as it forced me to confront if this path toward independence might ultimately sever ties I still valued despite their flaws. Returning home as dusk settled over the neighborhood with its rows of identical ranch-style houses glowing under streetlights, I found the atmosphere thickened by Lauren's growing irritability. Her attempts to reclaim the spotlight through exaggerated trip anecdotes clashing with Mom's distracted responses. And, seizing a private moment in the kitchen while preparing evening snacks, she cornered me with a hushed urgency, admitting the Paris excursion had spiraled into debt that now threatened her stability at the marketing firm. Pleading for my discretion regarding the account discrepancies because revealing her financial missteps would shatter the pedestal Mom had built for her. A confession that almost elicited sympathy until she tacked on a dismissive remark about how I could never grasp the pressures of being the family's high achiever, reigniting the fire that propelled me to orchestrate the next phase of revenge by casually retrieving an old family photo album from the shelf during dinner preparations. Flipping through its pages to highlight faded images of my childhood science fair wins and volunteer awards buried amid Lauren's trophy shots. But the real exposure came when I innocently mentioned overhearing a work call of hers earlier, alluding to the recent performance review that had dinged her promotion chances due to missed deadlines, a small lie she had perpetuated as unbridled success on social media, watching her face blanch as Mom paused in her chopping to absorb the implication. The air filling with the sharp tang of unspoken truths that chipped away at her untouchable image. As the evening progressed with a strained movie night in the living room where laughter felt manufactured against the undercurrents of revelation, my phone buzzed with a group invitation from Mom for a formal family dinner the upcoming weekend. Ostensibly to celebrate Lauren's return, but attached to the message was a scanned copy of partial bank statements riddled with highlighted anomalies that pointed suspiciously toward recent large outflows, the document's arrival sending a chill through me. as I realized the investigation had deepened, leaving me to grapple with the impending confrontation where buried secrets might surface fully, forcing a choice between full disclosure and further deception in a web that grew ever more tangled. The anticipated family dinner materialized under a veil of contrived normalcy that Sunday evening, with Mom transforming the dining room into a stage for reconciliation by laying out the heirloom tablecloth embroidered by Grandma years ago and arranging a centerpiece of autumn blooms from the backyard garden that masked the undercurrents of discord brewing. Since Lauren's premature return, Dad presiding at the head with his usual stoic demeanor tempered by the lingering effects of his recent health episode, while Lauren and I took our seats amid the clink of silverware and the savory aromas of pot roasts slow-cooked with herbs and root vegetables that evoked memories of less complicated holidays when favoritism hadn't yet carved such deep divides into our relationships. As the meal commenced with initial small talk about local events like the upcoming county fair and Dad's retirement hobbies tinkering with model trains in the garage, the conversation inevitably gravitated toward the elephantine issue of the family's financial stability, Dad clearing his throat midway through the main course to address the elephantine depletion of the savings account. His voice measured, but laced with disappointment as he laid out printed statements on the table showing the abrupt vanishing of the $25,000 that had served as their buffer against uncertainties, prompting Mom to interject with a plea for open dialogue about how such a loss could strain the bonds they'd always cherished, her eyes flicking between Lauren and me with a mix of hope and accusation that heightened the room's tension like humidity before a thunderstorm rolling in from the west. Lauren, attempting to deflect with her characteristic poise, launched into a defensive narrative about external factors like bank fees or possible hacks during her travels, but her words faltered under Dad's scrutinizing gaze, revealing the cracks in her facade as she admitted the Paris trip had indeed tapped into reserves more heavily than anticipated, a confession that intertwined with a major twist unfolding when Mom produced an old envelope from the sideboard containing yellowed documents from Grandma's estate, explaining how the account's core had originated from an uneven inheritance split decades earlier where my portion, intended for my education or future security, had been quietly merged into the family pool to cover early debts from Dad's job loss without my knowledge at the time, a revelation that reframed my birthday withdrawal not as sabotage, but as an inadvertent restitution of what had been mine all along, though the irony twisted sharply because it underscored how even in death, Grandma's intentions had been subverted by the same priorities that favored Lauren's trajectory over my steady path. Seizing the charged pause that followed this disclosure, with forks hovering forgotten over plates and the candle flames dancing erratically in the draft from an open window, I delivered the culminating act of revenge through a composed unveiling of my own evidence, sliding my tablet across the polished oak surface to display a comprehensive ledger I'd compiled from years of transaction records, each entry meticulously annotated to illustrate the disproportionate flow of my nursing salary contributions versus the outflows that had propped up Lauren's lifestyle choices from college loans to urban relocations. My narration delivered in an even tone that blended factual recounting with a touch of wry observation about how the family's pride had always come at the expense of the unseen laborer keeping the engine running. The presentation witty in its precision, like a prosecutor's closing argument that exposed hypocrisies without descending into vitriol, watching as Dad's face registered the math's unforgiving clarity and Mom's hand trembled on her water glass, tears welling as she grappled with the realization that her nurturing had inadvertently bred resentment in the daughter she'd overlooked. Lauren's response erupted in a flurry of justifications, detailing the pressures of her career demotion and the debts accrued in chasing the success they all expected. A vulnerability that humanized her struggles and momentarily softened the edges of my triumph, yet it couldn't erase the cumulative weight of birthdays forgotten and sacrifices unacknowledged, leading to a cacophony of voices overlapping in pleas and defenses until silence descended, heavy with the uncertainty of fractured trust and the impending decisions about rebuilding or letting go. Rising from my chair with a measured grace that belied the storm inside, I gathered my belongings and addressed them one final time, affirming that the reclaimed funds would fuel my own pursuits. Perhaps that long-overdue certification or a solo journey to reclaim personal horizons, without apology for evening a scale long tilted against me, then stepping out into the crisp autumn night where the stars pierced the Ohio sky like distant witnesses to my liberation, the cool air filling my lungs as I drove away from the house that had shaped yet confined me, a sense of empowerment surging alongside persistent doubts about whether this clever justice had mended the wounds or merely cauterized them into scars that would ache indefinitely. Leaving the family to confront the true cost of their pride, while I pondered if true freedom required severing roots or if forgiveness lingered as an unexplored path in the ambiguity of what lay ahead.